And joining us now, political commentators Chris Cillizza and Variety co-editor-in-chief Ramin Satuda. He's the author of Apprentice in Wonderland, How Donald Trump and Mark Burnett Took America Through the Looking Glass. I know you both stayed up late watching and listening to that conversation last night. Let's talk about where we landed this morning after all of that. Trump has said this would be the interview of the century. Chris, in reality, a peak of about 1.3 million tuned in concurrently. And now that it's over, what did Trump accomplish with it?
So I think Garrett's right that sort of the audience was not Chris Cillizza, for example. But what I would say is it was just kind of boring. I mean, I listened to, I'm not going to lie, Anna, I'd love to tell you I listened to every single second. I probably listened to about 75 or 80% of it. And if you have ever seen or listened to or read the transcript of a Trump campaign speech, all of what he said last night will be very familiar to you. It was kind of a conversation or interview in name only. Musk would ask something, and then Trump would just kind of go into his usual campaign riff, whether it was about immigration or, weirdly, Joe Biden, or, he just kind of has, it's like going to see the Eagles on tour at this point, right? They're going to play Hotel California. That's sort of what this was, really a sort of a greatest hits of Donald Trump. I don't know that it convinces anyone who was not already convinced. Maybe because it's a different medium, he reaches some people who have not heard this message, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine people have not heard at least most of what he said so far.
Well, look, Musk said up front that this would not be an adversarial interview, that he wanted open-minded independent voters to, quote, catch a vibe, to just get a feel for what conversation with Trump is like. So, Ramin, you've had multiple conversations with Donald Trump. Your takeaway, and if this is what they were going for, what do you think is the takeaway for viewers or for listeners?
I think calling it an interview is generous. For most of us as journalists watching it, it was a train wreck. Elon Musk didn't ask very many questions. Donald Trump wasn't fact-checked in real time. But the argument of my book, which is based on 6 interviews I conducted with Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump sees the world through the paradigm of reality TV and all the seasons of The Apprentice that he starred in. And he runs his campaigns like a reality show. And for him to be able to have this 2-hour conversation where he could say whatever he wants made him feel good. He doesn't talk to journalists because he is fact-checked. And so he gets to dominate the news cycle. People play clips. He talks about how his red button was bigger than any other red button, and he's able to get back in the news. And that's how Donald Trump campaigns. So I think even though for us as journalists it seemed like a dud, for Donald Trump, this is the way in which he brands himself. And I think it succeeded on that level.
That's interesting. I do want to highlight at least one odd moment in this 2+ hour conversation when Trump discussed Vice President Harris's physical appearance and her cover of Time magazine. Watch this.
She is terrible. She's terrible. But she's getting a free ride. I saw a picture of her on Time magazine today. She looks like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing. And actually, she looked very much like our great First Lady, Melania. She didn't look like Camilla. That's right. But of course, she's a beautiful woman. So we'll leave it at that.
Mispronouncing Kamala Harris's name there. Ramin, you have said that this is an example of why Trump needs an editor.
It is. When he was on The Apprentice, Mark Burnett could cut things that he said that didn't make sense. But what was also interesting, I went to Mar-a-Lago, and in the hallway of Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump has framed all the issues of Time magazine that he thought were flattering enough to frame. He said a lot of them he couldn't frame. But he wants to be on the cover of magazines. He's drawn to the media. So I saw this as Donald Trump being jealous that Kamala Harris was on the cover of Time magazine and Donald Trump wasn't this week. That to him is the ultimate currency. He looks at the world through the paradigm of fame.
So, Chris, we have some new reporting that Trump allies are trying to get him to refocus his message. But when he, I guess you could say, was on message last night, at times talking about the issues they want him to focus on, crime or immigration, he's trading in falsehoods. So what would a focused Trump look like?
Well, Anna, I would say good luck. I mean, I feel like the Trump allies want him to get on message is the story of literally the last 9.5 years, right? I mean, Trump is Trump. I mean, he's going to sort of do the kinds of things he did in that interview last night. There's just no way around it. It's both his great appeal and his great weakness. Look, I think it took him a very long time in that interview to get to what I think is probably his best message, which is Kamala Harris is too liberal. She's from San Francisco. Her voting record is too liberal in the Senate. Her time as a 2020 presidential candidate, she took a bunch of liberal positions that she's walked away from. That's not a bad message for him, and it could reach those low information swing voters. The problem is it came, 97 minutes into a 120-minute conversation because he spent the first 45 minutes, Elon and him patting each other on the back, and then him recounting in very long form the attempted assassination. So that's the issue. The message is in there. You just got to dig. And I don't know that the average swing voter is spending 90, 100 minutes listening to that on a late Monday night on the East Coast.
And the Harris campaign was responding in real time. They put out a fundraising email during that interview, and the subject line was, quote, "The two worst people you know are live right now." And the Harris camp messaging has been notable, Chris. Ezra Klein points out in the New York Times that gone is the grave, stentorian tone of Biden's news releases. Harris's communications are playful, mocking, confident, even mean. Trump is old and feeble. J.D. Vance is creepy. Her campaign wants to be talked about and knows how to get people talking. It's trying to do something Democrats have treated as beneath them for years: win news cycles. Chris, as we understand it, the Harris team has many of the same people who worked on Biden's campaign. What do you make of this rhetorical shift?
Well, I mean, look, the campaigns are reflective, generally speaking, of the candidate, right? And Joe Biden was not a guy, he's never really been a guy, go look at his Senate career, he's never really been a guy who liked the kind of like memification of politics, who liked the kind of social media back and forth. And so I think they throttled a lot of that stuff back. Kamala Harris is a different person, right? She's 20 plus years younger. She's a woman of color. She is someone who has kind of grown up more in the world of, I don't want to call it the Donald Trumpification of politics, but certainly the need to win each news cycle and win it like a knife fight, right? Like every day you have to fight to try to win news cycles. So I just think it's a reflection of the candidate on them more than it is the campaign. I think they had the capacity to do this before. I honestly think Joe Biden in his inner circle didn't want to do it because they were running this idea that he was the serious, more somber one, and Donald Trump was the more threatening one, the danger to democracy. I think that's a very different dynamic than how Kamala Harris wants to run.
Ramin, Trump is not necessarily used to this style of pushback from an opponent. Is this him getting a taste of his own medicine? And how do you think he'll respond if he continues to see this kind of an attack against him?
It is him getting a taste of his own medicine, and no one has successfully been able to do it. Whenever anyone tried to do a nickname for Trump, it kind of fell flat. I think it's interesting that 8 years ago, Michelle Obama said when the Republicans go low, the Democrats go high. And based on polling and Biden not doing well in this election cycle, I think the lesson is the Democrats have to go low. And that's what the Kamala Harris team is doing. And I think this is effective messaging. The question is, can this continue to work for the next 2 months as we wait for the election?
But you say it is effective. How do you think it is effective against Trump?
I think it's effective because Donald Trump is a reality star. And so you are fighting him as if he were a reality star. You're talking about him in lowbrow terms that a lot of Americans can understand and see when they see Donald Trump on the campaign trail.